本当？見えないでしょ？どこにいるのかな？見えないよ。
What's good, Internet? It's March 14th, and you are listening to Waypoint Radio, episode 549. I'm your host, Rob Zachney, and I'm joined by Patrick Klepek.
That's too many episodes.
It's quite a few. And Renata Price.
I am now the proud owner of a Google Pixel 7 Pro after the longest week of my life. Yeah, Rob, it is the big one.
Yeah, how are you liking that form factor?
Bad.
Not great. Were you kind of backed into it by availability?
Oh, I was not backed into it by availability. I walked into... Okay. At the beginning of last week, I left my phone in a lift. And that was stupid of me. That was dumb. And then I spent the entire week, one, trying to get it back. And two, trying to purchase a new phone. That saga concluded over the weekend when I received an email at Friday at 1:05 p.m. that my phone, a Samsung Z Flip 4, was ready for pickup. My girlfriend could not go with me to pick it up on Friday, and so we decided to go on Saturday. I open my laptop at 12:05 p.m. on Saturday. I see an email from Verizon saying that my order has been canceled and they have sent it back to the warehouse. I panic. We go in the next day. They have two phones in the entire store that they can sell me. A Galaxy S22 from like 2 years ago or a Google Pixel Pro 7. And I had a meeting in Manhattan this morning that I needed to go to. And so I took the phone that I did not want. And so now I have a Pixel Pro 7.
Like, you could decide in the next week you don't like this phone, right?
Oh, I got insurance and
No, but I just mean not insurance. But I mean, there are return policies on phones once you have opened them. I think you're not committed to this for years. If you wanted to say, hey, this phone is too big, there are return policies if you wanted to hope for availability of a different phone.
Because it is, let me be clear, a fucking gigantic phone.
It's enormous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and a watch out with the, this is true of a lot of phones. This is why people have the little nubbins to sort of hold it between your fingers rather than resting against your pinky. But resting it against your pinky to brace it is especially bad with the Pixel Pro. I was also stuck with limited availability, ended up getting the ginormous phone, and
yours because of the data, it wasn't you could only pick from a certain set of phones that would work with the plan that you had signed up for. Isn't that what ended up happening?
It wasn't that restrictive, right? It was Samsungs and Pixel and Apple and Google phones. But yeah, the big wrinkle was that everything was in shortage. And so, I found one place that had a phone, the week I needed it. And it was, it was the third place I'd tried, and they were like, we got a Pixel 6 Pro, and that's it. And I was like, then I guess I'm getting the Pro.
Look at this big ass outset for the camera.
Yeah,
it's insane.
They all have those now, though.
But I will say this one's at least cleverly designed because the Google Pixel Pro 7 has this big cutout for the camera that juts out of the phone, significantly. But the cool thing is that if you put the phone down, it means that you're actually keeping the lens safe because it's at a very slight angle, which keeps the lens from getting scratched up from putting it on a table or something. And I just think that's clever. I just want to acknowledge it.
Just make the phones thicker, man. This Apple-led obsession with thinness. So then you have to the lenses run into just. You can only do so much. It's a space problem. You want better pictures, you need more space. But we made these phones so goddamn thin. It's just added half an inch. Who cares? Recess it, please. Put it back in the phone.
No, Patrick, how else will they have the battery as close to your hand as possible so when the phone does anything, your hand starts to heat the fuck up unless you have a case? God, what a stupid way to design the world.
Gotta have a case. Wait, are you a non-case person?
No, I am a case person, but I got it yesterday. I want like a nice case.
Yeah, no, I hear you. One time my wife dropped her phone enough times that we didn't really have money to get a new phone, so we were like really resistant to it. But she dropped it, and then the screen shattered, and the phone still worked, but then she took a call and brought the phone away from her face, and she had cut her face. I was like, Donnie, I know we don't really have the money for a phone right now.
We're getting a phone.
We have to go get a phone. You cut your face with the glass. I don't care if it still works.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've also, maybe they've improved this, but I have found that is one of the most scratchable screens in all the phones I've owned.
Yeah.
This thing was picking up like wild scratches from zippered pockets. So like real annoying piece of kit there.
And let me just note one last thing. This is unrelated to actual like the process of experiencing the phone and everything, but was at the store, and the person who was selling me the phone called me and my girlfriend friends in the most pointed way possible. She's like, "Oh yeah, this is my friend," and like pulled her coworker over, who is an obvious gay man. And I just want to note that I'm wearing the shirt that I was wearing then. I have a shirt that just says Dyke on it. Kid was wearing that at the Verizon store, and still the pointed, "Oh, you two seem like such good friends." Thank you. We do. We are. Garbage ass.
Well, hopefully, Patrick, you had a more successful and enjoyable journey with Resident Evil 4. So I saw a bunch of people finally got access to that. Now I have my understanding was always that Resident Evil 4 occupies a beloved space among Resident Evils, but also among horror action games.
Yeah, it's a very specific moment in time. You cannot talk about the character action game without discussing Resident Evil 4. It sits at this really important pivot point in sort of the. Yes, of course, in the Resident Evil franchise, in which it's finally the series saying, shit, let's just become an action game and not be this less survival and less horror, but still kind of keeping that title because that's just what you do. And so I've played more than it is out there. I can't talk about that part until Thursday, but Capcom released a demo, which is something that's become kind of a tradition with the Resident Evil games, going back to Resident Evil 7, in which they released a little portion for people to play ahead of the game coming out, usually as a measure of extreme confidence in the game that they have built, because the Resident Evil games they've been doing for the last 5+ years have all been pretty much excellent, just kind of real bangers across the board for the last couple of Resident Evils. Although Resident Evil 3 remake was not very good, but neither is Resident Evil 3. So what are we going to do there? And so what is out is the village sequence from Resident Evil 4, which is a top 10 video game introduction sequence. It is a moment where Resident Evil kind of flips the script on itself mechanically and aesthetically. It's a game that is largely in the dark, that is about sort of hiding, creepy monsters in the ceilings, around corners. This is a game in which zombies slowly shamble towards you, and then occasionally there are enemies that act a little faster, but really it's about creatures of varying horror kind of shambling towards you. And what happens in Resident Evil 4 is that you come across, Leon Kennedy, one of the two playable characters from Resident Evil 2, has been enlisted with a government special agency that is kind of going around doing various things. And he is tasked with tracking down the president's daughter. In this one, he is tracked to some remote village, I believe in Spain. And when you get here, it's a village that is largely abandoned, and it's I know how this goes. It's time to explore, and crucially, it's in the daytime. And what happens pretty quickly, both in the original and in this updated take on Resident Evil 4, is the villagers are here. They're ready to party. They got pitchforks. Someone's wearing a bag on their head, and they got a chainsaw. They're just ready to throw down. And it is this crystallizing moment where the game is saying to you clearly, how you have played these games in the past no longer really applies. It is a moment in which the game overwhelms you with enemies. It is not actually a sequence to be won as much as it is a sequence to be survived. And so when you get into it, you'll have, like it's the start of the game. You don't got many bullets, and what you are like busting through windows, crawling across the tops of these houses, and it is just this like sense of like you're turning around, maybe putting down one of these sort of crazed villagers, and just wonder, how am I supposed to succeed in this section? And the great, one of many brilliant things that happens in this section is that it just like all of a sudden a village bell goes off and they just leave. Like they shamble away to go do something else, and you as the player are left to just look around going, what the fuck did I just play? And what's interesting about this remake is I think it's attempting to do, as we've had conversations about a number of times in the last year or so, most notably with Metroid Prime and with Dead Space, is what is the goal of this update? What is it worth revisiting other than just a chance to sell you this game again? And I think this team, which is the same team that worked on the brilliant Resident Evil 2 remake, which I think is not just like repackaging that game. I think it makes it better and a more interesting game, in addition to looking gorgeous. This one, I haven't gone back and replay. I replayed the intro of Resident Evil 4 when a big update came out for the Oculus, in which you could play that game in VR. But it's mostly just RE4 with a new interface. And I think what they really accomplish pretty brilliantly in here is, there are what feels like 50 enemies in this. I'm not counting. I'm just running. And there was this moment where I've played this before. I've probably played this intro a dozen times, and they managed to draw attention out of it again. They managed to feel overwhelming all over again, despite it being the exact same kind of setup with a shiny new coat of paint. And if they're able to apply that level of managing to wring out the same sort of feelings you got from that original game, well, it makes me very excited to see what they might do with the rest of it.
Was it predominantly the sheer number of enemies they're throwing at you? Because obviously, as hardware's improved, you can have more enemies on the screen. You can have more happening on the screen. Because the thing is, Resident Evil 4, at least from where I hear discussion of it, maybe it's a game that did not have as much obvious room for improvement as Resident Evil 2. I never felt like Resident Evil 2 was beloved.
Resident Evil 2? Oh, yeah. Not true.
Rob, what? No, even I know this.
Resident
I'm
Evil
just
3,
a little guy.
They're different games, right? Resident Evil 2 begins the series ascent into an action series. If you maybe some of what you're hearing there, Rob, is there was always a tension in the Resident Evil fandom, of which I was very much a part, was oh, this is cool, but it's not I liked my slow, creeping sense of dread Resident Evil 1, and Resident Evil 2, follows the, Alien to Aliens, Terminator 2 route of there's only so much we can do to scare you with zombies again. So what if we're shooting more of them? And it kind of leans into that. Although Resident Evil 2 has the Mr. X kind of, the kind of actual Terminator style character that is tormenting you in that. But sorry, you continue your point.
No, I just mean Resident Evil 2, with that remake is a pretty thoroughgoing overhaul of the game, but I did not get the and that seemed very welcome in the case of that game. Whereas Resident Evil 4, I feel like it tips more toward reverence, where it's put this baby under glass, no notes.
It's a really good game, but also one of the curious things about revisiting Resident Evil 4 that makes that one a unique case is replaying Metroid Prime like I just did. That game, I think, was a masterpiece when it came out. It's still, you can play it now and still feel that. You can still, man, this is something special. Part of that is because post Metroid Prime did not inspire hundreds, thousands of games to follow in its footsteps. Metroid Prime sort of remains sort of this singularly weird little thing. And part of why revisiting it feels so fantastic is because, I can't load up Steam and go, I'm about to scratch that itch here. And what's different about Resident Evil 4 is that it influenced everything that came after it. Like Shinji Mikami's, team that worked on that. Like even Mikami himself failed to chase like his own creation when with The Evil Within, a game that just feels as though Mikami stepped off of Resident Evil 4, revisited it, 15 years later and said, I'll just make a sequel to that game, ignoring the fact that the entire games industry looked at Resident Evil 4 and went, this is the template we're all going to build off of going forward. This is so smart and interesting. We'll just build from there. And Resident Evil 4 just ignores, or Evil Within ignores all the forks that happened afterwards.
So, Patrick, I am curious. What do you, like, you're saying here that, like, oh, yeah, this is the blueprint going forward, right? What is that blueprint? Like, what is the thing that, like, you see as so fundamentally defining about Resident Evil 4 that, like, is carried forward in, like, to such a degree?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if that goes down to anything like single or particular, but it's really the shooting feels like it's a very competent, well-made action game with shooting. Whereas, Rob, you played Resident Evil 1. Like that remake is fantastic, but I don't know that you're going around saying the gunplay here is exquisite. It's more of a game that is a combination.
That remaster feels much more like this is Resident Evil 1, but like. The improvements are they're very profound. Like the controls are so different from what they were originally, but the vibe of the game is so similar to what it was.
Yeah, and I'd say like one of the huge step forwards that Resident Evil 4 takes is like it feels really good to shoot. It really feels really good to engage in the crowd control. Like a lot of what it lays down is this groundwork for like how you handle like a third person character action game. Like I think you can point to any singular. It's less a single thing that people follow as much as looking at Resident Evil 4. Like this is how games should feel, and not necessarily sort of horror games necessarily, but just sort of that era of the third-person character action game. You look up anything that comes in its wake, and you can see, oh, they played Resident Evil and wanted more of that. But that's an interesting. I don't know off the top of my head what I would point to as the singular element, as much as. Just sort of everything it did was kind of seen as a kind of realignment of what those games were. And it made it even more interesting was that it only came out on GameCube to start. It's like the platform most people did not have if they had bought. You owned a GameCube because you already had a PlayStation or an Xbox. Like it was rare that you were the GameCube only household. But this was an era of Capcom where I think it was famously called the Capcom 5, where they committed to, which sounds like we're putting people in jail for bank crimes, the Capcom 5, but it was Capcom committing to making like 5 sort of like pillar games for the GameCube. I think they only made 4. One of them like was some sort of a aerial action game that never materialized. But so what's interesting is I need to go back and actually play a little bit more, at least at the intro of Resident Evil 4, because I don't have a good grasp right now, Rob, like the revelations you and I had playing Dead Space of, well, this is just it, right? Like this is mostly just it. And I cannot tell, and I don't think it's breaking embargo to say like beyond the space that is in the demo, it's unclear to me, what is traversal that is just, we've taken the maps here and laid them down, and what is the developers going above and beyond to sort of like what does it mean to play a game like this in 2023? I don't know. So I'll have to do some of that research between now and Friday when I can talk a little more thoroughly about what the game is doing beyond the opening village. But yeah, it's. But
you're still in that like this feels like Resident Evil 4, and that's awesome.
That was one thing I was very curious about, because Resident Evil 4 is a very tonally weird game. It's a game where you are like one of the main mechanics you do to defeat enemies is to shoot them in the leg so they fall to the ground, and then there's a button prompt so you can do a suplex on them or a roundhouse kick. And it's sick. It's great. It's like, so, like go look up. There's like, if you just Google, Resident Evil 4 suplex, you will get a bunch of compilations of people like just, throwing cultists to the ground during sequences in this game. And it's just extremely silly. It's very WWE style stuff. And part of what they did in Resident Evil 2 especially was, they really grounded that. I mean, it's already they made it scary and spooky and in all the ways that I was hoping for. It's, you know, I think it's a tremendous accomplishment. And I was like, well, what are they going to, like, what do you do with Resident Evil 4? A game that refuses to be kind of pigeonholed to a single tone? Like, what do you do with a game that can oscillate between all of this stuff so rapidly? And I don't, that's not an answer I can really speak to quite yet until the embargo is up. But like in the village sequence, yeah, man, like you want to roundhouse kick this woman with to the face, like you can, and it looks cool, even if it looks extremely goofy and kind of like out of place. It's in place because it's Resident Evil 4, and that's just what it did before.
Patrick, how should I, Renata Price,
Yeah.
experience Resident Evil 4 for the first time? Should I go back and play Resident Evil 4 before this game comes out, or do you think I should go in fresh?
I think you can go in fresh. I again can't really speak too much more to what happens after the village, but the team that worked on this has, like, I wouldn't tell you to go play the original Resident Evil 2. I would tell you to play that remake, and if you found it interesting, then go back and play the original Resident Evil 2 just to see kind of what they did with it. I think that was a game that an update that kept the real soul of it. Dead Space did it too, right? Like Rob and I, playing through both of those, that original game is still great. I don't know that I would still be telling people, if you're interested in playing this game, play the new one. Like, they did it. They nailed it. Like, this is Dead Space and looks spectacular, and you get all the quality of life upgrades and the kind of stuff that you would want. And this is the kind of team that I think is going to knock that out of the park with this update, and you will get all the fun stuff that comes along with, playing a game made on modern consoles. And then if you find that interesting, it'd be worth going back to see how that's changed. But then again, Resident Evil 4 is still a great game. It is still a very good game. Like, if you couldn't play any of them and you could just play the original, you wouldn't have to do a lot of squinting to be like, I wonder if I can figure out why people thought this was interesting. Like, I think pretty quickly, even in just the village sequence alone, you would understand why, when that game originally came out, people were losing their minds for it.
Now, an additional question. Did you play any of the VR version of Resident Evil 4?
I did. I played up through, like, the village sequence, because that's, like, a good first half hour of the game, depending on how fast you get through it. And the VR one is an excellent adaptation of that. It really rethinks how the UI works, and it is cool to aim a gun at a head and pull it off with the precision that you get out of VR relative to a controller or a keyboard and mouse. It's a very good version of one of those. It doesn't feel bolted on. It feels as though the team that worked on that spent a lot of time wondering what would Resident Evil 4, how would it work in VR. It's a very good one of those. But that's another spoke off of it that you can walk down.
Got it. Thank you.
So I have continued to put more time into the Pale Beyond, which I just played the start of, I think like a week or so ago when I brought it up. So to refresh, the Pale Beyond is a visual novel, like Arctic management, like survival game is the way I put it. Like the conceit is that you are part of an expedition going to recover what remains of a previously lost expedition in the Arctic, and you're sort of put aboard the ship with a tight-knit crew under a captain they've sailed with for years. And in the prologue, spoilers for the setup of this game, but like in the prologue, by the end of it, right when the ship is trapped in ice and you're in that situation where the ship's not going to sail anymore, and now this has become like an Arctic survival camp out here on the ice sheets, the captain goes missing. You're sort of put in charge of the crew, who don't really know you. You don't really know them. And every week it's a resource allocation game, really, where every week you are assigning different workers different tasks that produce different resources that your crew needs. And so, like, the tension that you often have is, if you are like, this is a lot like a pared back Frostpunk in some ways in terms of the systems you are juggling. Like, so if you let the camp run a bit cold, if you only use like half the fuel that it recommends you use for keeping everyone like safely warm, some number of crew members will develop like a freezing condition, and if that's not treated, they will develop like frostbite and like die. And if you cut rations to like half, a certain number of crew members will develop like a malnourished condition. And you can treat those things by like bringing up the temperature or like sending people to the medical tent. But those have limited spots too. And so it's all this like juggling act of how much resource conservation are you willing to do, knowing that is going to generate further complications that will themselves require further resources as you go. But overall, I think that this was developed by not sure how this is pronounced, Bellular Studios, but it's published by Fellow Traveler, who really seem to be cornering the market on the narrative strategy game, as it were. Like this is the publisher behind like Suzerain, which is sort of an all-timer for me. And I think sort of the insight here is that a lot of these things they do feel like strategy games, but they get it maybe. Let me back up. A lot of times when we think of strategy games, they're all systems, right? And so if you're thinking about a Arctic survival game, maybe it would look a lot like Frostpunk, but where it would be like everyone's kind of anonymous, like maybe little events crop up, but like they aren't like people you really know. It's like moving the pieces around the board, having them work in different spots, and certain things are resources are consumed at a steady rate, like a la an RTS and such. And I think what, the types of developers that Fellow Traveler is working with, a lot of these like strategic visual novel developers, the insight they've had is that for a lot of these settings, what's kind of interesting is the interplay of like the character dynamics and the personalities as opposed to the pure system. So like, if we think about why has it always been so hard to make a good Star Trek game, right? And it's because like piloting or captaining the Enterprise, like shooting the phasers, like none of that's really that interesting, right? Like it's kind of cool, the spaceship's cool, but like what's essential to Star Trek is the crew, right? Like if you can't go and have the conversation with Mr. Spock to like have the breakthrough idea of how to save the day, if you can't go and like deal with the conflict that's erupted with the doctor or something, then it just doesn't have the right vibe. But that is the stuff that's hard to systematize. That's the stuff that's hard to like a lot of strategy game design is like, well, it runs on meters. Like where's the if you're asking me like how do we generate a moment where Mr. Spock is depressed, we need to have a Mr. Spock meter. The visual novel kind of sidesteps that whole problem, right? Where it's like there's going to be story beats where these things happen, and so you're going to have these dynamics and you're going to have an impact on them, but it's not going to be driven by some sort of like mathy system. The mathy system that's running is just simple arithmetic to keep the overall like state of the camp in focus. And I think I don't know that I would say, I'm not going to say this is like it's not up in Suzerain territory where I think it's like one of like, I think that is genuinely like one of the most brilliant implementations of like this sort of idea, but it is really effective at like walking that line between feeling super ominous and scary, but not being so punishing that it feels like you're having to constantly like walk back to the previous branch on a choose your own adventure and be like, okay, I really fucked that up and I gotta re-rack. But overall, it's like it really is working in part because like there's some really nice art and just an overall like good vibe in terms of the music and like the atmosphere of like when you see the when you change camps and you go deeper onto the ice sheet, your camp gets more and more vulnerable. This little huddle of tents and buildings in the middle of the ice, and so it's ended up being like a really good game that gets at the vibe of a TV show like The Terror in some ways.
Great show.
Yeah,
just incredible first season. Anyway, I think.
Well, the first season is based on a novel, right? And then they're like, it's going to be a brand. It's going to be a story anthology, and they just didn't have like by all accounts as good a source material with season 2. But yeah, and so like it gets at some of that where, as sort of the new commander of this crew, you are constantly like a little bit out of the loop and you're just getting to know people. And a big function of this is you need to maintain sort of a critical mass of loyalty from the leaders of the ship's company in order to maintain your captaincy. And so
can a mutiny occur? Like, what are the fail states of this other than...
This is the thing. So I haven't had a mutiny occur, but things have not gotten truly dire. But like there was, at least in one place, at the end of the prologue, you were voted in as captain. There's a whole like voting screen to show like how the voting blocks go. And it makes me think you're going to see that again. It certainly seemed like a bit of interface that is there to be used at least a couple times over the course of the game. The big fail state I hit was so in the first act, you receive a warning that as the ice is thickening, that sort of got your ship trapped and is shifting, the pressure is building on the ship and the ice wants to like buckle the ship's hull and destroy it. And that's going to happen in X number of weeks. And I just pushed it too hard. I was like, I think this is a good base of operations. Like, we'll stick with the ship as long as possible, and then we will move out. I stuck with it a week longer than I should have, and everyone died. And it was like, okay, well, now we got to...
so there truly is... I was wondering if, I haven't played a lot of these sort of like narrative/strategy games, but one of the things I liked so much about Citizen Sleeper last year was... and I ended up interviewing the dev about it eventually for a story that's on the site, was it threatens you with a fail state, and it generates so much tension out of this thing that can happen to you that you are, not just because you want your character to like continue living just because that's how you frequently play video games, but it creates all this storytelling tension. But ultimately, like, it's not really. It's more just like the threat of a fail state. Most players are never going to get edge up close enough to it they might get to a knife's edge, but they find a way out of it. And what they'll then never discover, which is what I didn't discover till I just asked, was, hey, like, we're never truly going to bounce you out of this game. We'll like find you a way back in. And so I was curious how a game like this, which is a game about like probably no good choices, it's all bad choices, and then just dealing with the ramifications of the bad choices, how that stacks in a way that leads to either success or failure.
I don't know how successful that particular example is, because like obviously it teaches a lesson early in the game that like when people tell you, hey, like there's a timer on this that is running and you can't see it, but you do need to bear in mind that it is happening. It's useful for instructing you in that part of the game, but at the same time, what happened in practice was I just wound the clock back 3 weeks to when they first bring up the fact that the ice is building up and the pressure is building up, and then I was like, okay, well,
I'll take that one more seriously.
After 2 weeks, I will say like it's time to evacuate the ship, and then we're going to be fine. And so there's a bit of that, like it feels a bit like you're going to be doing some of that choose your own adventure rote, like I'm just going to not make the same mistake I did. But I would say like that's a particularly dramatic example. I think the bigger tension is, and I feel like this is what the game is building towards, can you save everybody? Can you keep everyone alive out here on the ice? Because here's the other thing: the bigger the crew is, like the harder it is to feed them. That's a part of this, is having the full ship's company with you. Consumes a ton of food, which means that you have to consume, like, the way it works is you go to your little map while you're in camp and you send out expeditions to go, like, forage and hunt. And you'll be sending, with the full crew, you'll need to send, like, almost everybody out hunting just so you can sort of be able to keep steady rations for the next food cycle. And there's kind of a question of, am I doing the right thing by being so antsy about, like, oh man, like, I can't have malnourishment break out among this crew? But it might be that, like, some of this is going to require, like, first you're going to have to, like, you're going to have to put these people on, like, scanty rations and, like, thin heat in order to get them all through. And you're going to have to deal with the, like, sickness and malnutrition that comes from that. Because if you don't do that, if you just try to keep everyone's meters full, you're just going to consume way too many resources to survive. And so I am beginning to feel like I am at that tipping point where, like, the cycle of the machine that runs every week is you allocate people going to do tasks and you allocate your resources. It is beginning to wobble, right? It is getting colder. More people are coming back, like, hurt and sick from the hunts. And that is all stuff that has to be sort of addressed the next time around, but that's going to consume more resources. And I'm beginning to have that loop where I am now spending about half my resources repairing the damage that's happened to my crew week to week. And that is meaning that,
boy, it sure would be sad if that hunting crew didn't come back. I mean, we'd all be really upset that Rhonda didn't make it back. Whoops, guess we got some more beans this
Rhonda,
week to go around.
Jesus, Patrick.
yeah, so
Ice
it is kind of that stuff. Like, it's, but I think the bigger thing overall is just the vibe. The characters. I think some of the characters are really well drawn. Some of them are, like, it's still a bit of a game of caricatures. Again, if we're using the, like, if we're using, like, Suzerain or Citizen Sleeper as reference points, I'm not sure I have a strong sense of characters being complicated in the way they are in those games. Whereas here they're a bit more what you see is what you get. But I'm starting to see also those fun little indications of, like, hey, this character's personality seems to be changing over the course of the last couple weeks. Like, is the madness taking them on the ice, or are they observing things that are real, right? Like, there's this character that is beginning to be like, hey, there's some real problems in this camp. And I'm like, I don't see them, but maybe they're right. But maybe they're also starting to just, like, turn against the crew. And that's sort of the other fun part of this is we're starting to, like, get into that good. We're going to check some boxes for the Arctic Explorer disaster story.
So I have a question that I've been thinking about since we started talking about this, like, the strategy game visual novel hybrid, right? Do you feel like the game is telling a story that the systems would have, like, if an emergent story that you had been building while you were playing these same systems, do you think you would have arrived at something similar to the actual, like, story this game is trying to tell? Would the systems have produced this, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I think in the broad outlines, yes, in terms of, like, getting the crew through week to week, on their journey across the ice. In terms of, like, the detail of what life is like in camp, who the people are, that is the stuff that wouldn't have come through, right? Like, the Frostpunk version of this is Frostpunk rides on really good animation and art and, like, overall, like, aesthetics to communicate something about the place you live, but you have no real sense for who anyone is in this town, right? It's like there's engineers, there's children, there's workers, and, your only sense of, like, who they are as characters, little, like, portraits when an event concerning them crops up and they're, huddled in their little engineer's outfit or whatever, and that's the only interaction. Here, the thing that, like, just pure systems wouldn't have produced is, like, okay, well, because I've been handling things a certain way, the sort of gruff, hard to impress ship's carpenter Grimly is starting to warm up to me, and I'm getting Grimly on side. And Grimly, if Grimly's on my side, then like a lot of the old sailors are also going to come around to me, and that's something that, again, like the more abstract systems game might bring across with like crew meter go up, but it wouldn't have the feeling of Grimly's my guy now. Like he and I are like this. But yeah, it's been a fun. It's been a perfect game to. One nice thing about the cyclical nature of this as well is each week is like 15 minutes of play, and so it's very easy to sort of like, I'm gonna fire it up, make some decisions. All right, now I gotta go clean the kitchen or take the dog for a walk or whatever.
Good luck with your ice cold temperatures.
Yeah, exactly.
Time to Alt F4.
The only thing is, you have to play through the whole cycle. It can't save mid-cycle. So, like, I got burned a couple times because I was like, surely it's going to save this progress. I'm in a different part of the day. It's that. No, everything was lost. It just kicks you back to the start of the day. So that's the one thing you got to be careful for. But beyond that, it's a lot of fun. I've been really enjoying it, in spite of a growing sense of like impending disaster. But that's what I kind of signed up for, is what's this impending disaster going to look like? Ren, last thing before I want to hit before break.
Yeah.
You've been playing a game called Mortal Sin.
Yes, I
have.
have.
Right now all I can say is it looks very cool and strange, but I don't know what it is.
It is an extremely visually striking roguelite that is coming out on Wednesday into early access, and is just like a really... The aesthetic touch points I would use, there are two games that it makes me think of. It's like a step between Return of the Obra Dinn and Saturnalia. As like it has the color palette of Saturnalia, but the like a similar scanline heavy, extremely high contrast, very basic texturing, primary color work of Obra Dinn, right? And it is a melee focused roguelite that is, it just feels really good to play, is the thing. Like, it is making my brain feel good. Like, the melee combat lands exceptionally. So basically the premise is that you are a person who is fighting through, I believe, hell, in order to like attempt to like reckon with a mortal sin and achieve immortality. And like each run has you go into these like one of three levels, and the whole point of the game is to beat all three levels in sequence, right? That is, it's doing the thing that many of these games do, right? And I think that it couples that like pretty basic structure with a melee combat system that is like pretty engaging. So like, for example, there are like 4 things you can do with every weapon. You can kick with your little feetsies. You can bash an enemy, which is kind of like a sprint. And that acts as a dodge too, effectively. So like if you hold back and hit the bash button, you'll like bash and push back. And then there is a basic attack, a charged attack, and then there's a block, which you can use to parry, right? But the basic interplay between these is like, in and of itself, really neat, right? You use kicking for crowd controlling a single unit. You use bashing to get out of the way or close distance really quickly against an enemy that's going to hit you. But then the game starts layering on more things as you go and like giving you access to combos. So for example, if you kick and then do a normal slash, instead you do like a forward strike, right? You do like a stab forward that will like cut through enemies, right? Or if you do a bash and then do an attack, you will do like a power attack immediately, right? And the other cool thing about this is that because you are fighting the undead, you have to remove all of an enemy's limbs. It is not like
all of them, like yes, head, 2 arms, 2 legs.
Yeah,
they'll just crawl towards you, just like, hey, I'm still here.
Yep. And like it's not like you have to do specific limb targeting all the time, because that would get, I think, like pretty frustrating and like pretty like micromanagey. If you hit someone with a hard enough attack, all their shit's going flying. Like they are gone. But you do get these moments where you're like, okay, cool. I thought that I had really cut through this like mob of enemies that has been chasing me. No, I haven't. I just took out all of their legs and they're still coming towards me. And there's a spear guy over to the right who I have to deal with. And like in these moments, like the combat systems really start to sing. And eventually you can unlock like more combos. So for example, if you kick someone, then bash them, and then do a normal attack, you transition directly into like a spinning whirlwind. And so like you are using all of these like different tools and different patterns to like, it feels almost like a first person character action game, like a Devil May Cry almost.
Have you ever played Xenoclash?
No.
This is a long running series. A new one just came out this week. Xenoclash it's the first one's from 2009. It's a ways back, but it's a first person kind of, they describe themselves as like making first person fighting games, but you know, essentially it's like first person brawlers where there are, just like you're describing, like combo systems and a real explicit focus on like first person, like hand to hand combat and systems that engage like deeply with that. It was extremely novel when the original one came out on the 360 and PC in 2009. I have not seen what this team has been doing with those systems with the newest one. I got a code for it, but I just haven't had a chance to crack into it. But I couldn't help but think of this game as you were describing it, because it is definitely playing in similar territory.
Yeah, and I think that like the basic systems are really satisfying to use. I think the presentation is also like, it's just a really visually striking game. However, the animations, I believe this was made by like a solo dev.
Yeah, there's one person credited on Steam.
Yes. The animations are simultaneously like kind of scuffed, where it's like, oh, that didn't feel like an attack animation that the enemy was doing. Like that was pretty awkward. It didn't feel like something was trying to hit me, right? But at the same time, the degree to which the hit stop has been tuned in this game is fucking tremendous. Like hit stop is like the key to making any action, or like one of the keys to like making any action game like capital F feel good. And this game's hit stop is delicious. Like if you are using like a big great sword and you hit an enemy or a group of enemies, the entire game just grinds to a fucking halt in a way that is like utterly delectable. And also like gives you time to figure out what the next combo you're going to do is when you're like surrounded by like a large group of enemies. And so like it is not perfectly polished. I think the animations are a bit messy, but the game feels so good that I can ignore literally all of that. Like I can toss all that shit out the window because man walk through room with big sword feel very good. And I'm really liking it so far. It's releasing in early access, but like the dev is like, it's content complete, right? I consider this a finished video game, but I would like to like keep developing it. Like that is the reason that I'm putting it in early access, is because I just want to keep doing this. I'm having fun.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
Yeah,
it
it's really sick.
All right, well, that is Mortal Sin, and yeah, it is coming out, well, by the time you listen to this, apparently tomorrow. So very, very, very soon. We're going to take a quick break here and back after this. Well, that was The Last of Us.
Yeah. Yeah, the finale for the Last of Us took place the last evening. I thought it was good. It was not effective. It was definitely one of those where like knowing. So one thing that's really interesting about where this episode ends up is part of the magic of the ending of the original Last of Us is that there's 7 years between the original game and the sequel. There's not as much ambiguity. Like that was like what led to endless conversations about what happens in the final arc of that game is you don't know how these characters really feel about what happened, and that there never really needed to be a sequel if you didn't want to The Last of Us, and arguably, as we've said sometimes on this podcast, like maybe shouldn't have. Whereas here, I do think all of it is a little bit undercut by the fact that, a month ago, there were tweets from HBO saying season 2 coming soon. Because it sort of leaves, it's more of a cliffhanger as opposed to a period. And I do think that makes the final exchange between Joel and Ellie feel a little bit different.
I gotta be honest, I feel like I have been pulling away from this show as it has gone on. I did not think that the previous episode with David and such and the little cannibal cult did not land for me at all. Everything we discussed, the various ways that the Riley flashback stuff maybe didn't, it was such a literal adaptation of video game stuff, didn't land. And then this one felt so rushed. It was really it really felt like an episode where a bunch of things had to happen, but they didn't necessarily have space to breathe. Do you remember in we've all seen Groundhog Day, right? Bill Murray, Harold Ramis.
No, but I'm familiar.
So there's a point where as he's trying to basically speed run his days, right? And he takes on this manic quality as he begins to try to replay moments that occurred naturally on a previous iteration of the day. Now he is trying to accelerate past them to get to the next part. And that is the vibe that this episode had in places. And in particular, it felt like the early stages where Joel and Ellie are hanging out, it felt like they were rushing through so much work to try to get Joel to a different place that it began to feel like Joel was fast forwarding through his scenes in just a weird way. I was watching it, I was like, damn, did Joel, get divorced and win custody of Ellie between these two episodes? Because this is weird. Come on, kiddo. Just weird vibes. And some of that is in the game. But here it is so compressed that it begins to register as just kind of false, I guess. Not supported, not like it is an evolving relationship, but that the relationship needs to get to this point.
I mean, Rob, didn't you know that saving a young girl from a pedophilic cannibal instantly turns you into a good dad?
He didn't save anyone. He didn't do shit in that scene.
No, he did not. Sorry. Let me put respect on Ellie.
God, and that's the other thing is a small thing, but the cannibal episode 2. We got all this trouble of it's an entire settlement full of people, right? And in the game, the thing there's one of the things they handle is once all hell breaks loose, that whole settlement comes alive and is a hostile territory. Here, their big old resort lounge catches fire.
Nobody. Is everyone okay in there?
No, just nothing. All those people that we've spent time with the rest of it doesn't matter. They're asleep.
I mean, I think that the fact that this ending is pretty rushed for me feels kind of true of the whole season. I think that 9 episodes of television was not enough time for the thing that they wanted to do, especially if they were going to, and they did, spend time in other parts of the world, right? If you are going to tell this story in 9 episodes, then I don't know if you can have my favorite scene of one of my favorite scenes of the season, which is the beginning of episode 2, right? Those moments where the camera leaves our characters and is what else is happening in the world. I think that a better version of this show gets maybe 3 more episodes. Maybe we hit 12 and then fill some of that space with more time for Joel and Ellie to build this relationship, point A, and point B, more time for the rest of the world to exist.
Yeah, I broadly agree. I mean, I think it lands, right? I think it lands the plane just fine. I think part of where some of this is coming from is when it has moments where it allows itself a chance to breathe, you can see it blossoming into something more. And so I think this season was effective at retelling this story and doing some work to kind of expand and improve on it in many ways, but that I think there was an opportunity cost at like some of those decisions. Like, you know, episode 3 was tremendous, but essentially you lose an episode with Joel and Ellie as a result. And it's like, okay, you know, if ultimately this is a story about these two characters and evolving relationship, as much as I enjoyed that third episode, you essentially lose out on, but that's the thing. Like, I think the third episode was one of their stronger episodes. And absolutely. So I think like the show at its best, and to Ren's point as well, the side trip into how did like this unfold in a different place, what was the origin of this, but also we're going to meet this character and have her sort of confront her foreknowledge of what all of this means. Those moments are really good, and they do so much to establish a tone for the show. And I like, it has just felt like for me since they left Tommy's, effectively, we have just been whipping through plot beats, and there hasn't been a lot of, to me it also is like there hasn't been earned character development, I guess is what I would say. Like, characters end up in different places, but it now just begins to feel like, well, we got to move Joel into this like slightly needy, desperate parent, mold. We got to get him to that place because that's going to have to like go dark and power him through a mass slaughter of the fireflies. So we need to get him to that place real fast. We need to get Ellie super depressed and then quietly like resolved to have her sacrifices and everyone else's sacrifices redeemed. We got to get her to that place really quick. How are we gonna do that? She's gonna be really bummed about like the trauma that like meeting David inflicted on her. So that's where we're going. But they don't talk about it, right? Like it's all like there's not even space for there to be dialogue, and not necessarily. Maybe she doesn't want to talk about it, but there's not even space for Joel to ask about it. You know what I mean? And clearly at that stage in their relationship, you would imagine he would be a little attuned to what's going on there. And there are moments where he is obviously like, why isn't this conversation landing with you? But you're right that it can only kind of occur in the video gamey, we're walking from waypoint A to waypoint B. And there's no time for it to linger in the same way that like an episode, the first one in Kansas City 4 or whatever, where like they have the discussion about the gun, right? Like there is no equivalent to that sort of come down from a moment in when the way she hacks David to fucking pieces as the world burns around her. You would imagine you would want a sort of a moment to kind of connect on that, and it just never really occurs because it has to get them to the hospital. A different episode that cut right before Joel's rampage, like ended like. The episode before the finale is like them getting there, like having more time, and then like before the rampage occurs, like that would be the setup for the finale. At least would have provided a little more exercise in that all. Well, I think David in general. I think David is a problem in the original game. It's a really weak part of the game. Like Ellie on her own is the strongest part of that sequence, but then it's easy to forget all the other stuff that happens. And I would have much rather have just had Ellie on her own, brief encounter with some group, and then not have to go through all of that. But the other thing is because both like I didn't think that. I certainly didn't look at The Last of Us and be like, the problem with the David sequence is there's just too much subtlety. But the show apparently decided there was. So we get this like. Instead of the creepy like Humbert intimations of the game, we get this David by the end of that sequence being like, I like it rough, and then getting hacked to pieces. And it's like it's both like he's a gross character, he's meant to be gross, but the thing they really fumble here is that I think one of the things that like we're supposed to draw from his conversation with Ellie, where he sees in her a kindred spirit in terms of like
you're a violent and hardened person in this world, I think we are supposed to draw the inference that like something that haunts her about that is because he is playing on insecurities she has, that she is like sort of a broken and like malevolent force in this world, but we can't linger over that because also like immediately after that he's like and therefore you will be my child bride, which moves that as that is going to become that moves to the forefront of concerns, and that is a problem easily solved with I'm going to take this cleaver and hack you to little pieces about it. But the thing that gets lost is any sort of indication of like, wow, like some of this really got to Ellie because David is such an obvious piece of shit and he's played so broadly. Well, there's actually like, you know, you can say like, some of this really got to Ellie in terms of it's like a traumatic thing, but anything that David would say about you just isn't going to land. We just don't, there's nothing we can.
He's not a serious person.
He's not a serious person. He's not like, it's like
he's a cartoon villain in a game. Like he's the most cartoonish villain in the game. And that comes across here, even if the performance isn't necessarily wildly over the top until the very end when he turns into a stalking video game boss.
Right, and so we're just not going to take seriously anything that he's going to be like. He has no insight that he's going to bring. This is like the opposite of the Joker in The Dark Knight, where it's like there is this like ridiculous character, but he is able, you know, in the Justice Guys to draw out some truth about like the absurdity of the situation, the absurdity of like Batman's place in this like universe. And here we just got like kind of a weird piece of shit who says a bunch of stuff about Ellie to justify his own predations. But I do think the show wants us to feel like, this is hitting on some of Ellie's insecurities, but it's completely like stepped on by what that sequence turns into. Which again, also a problem with the original game. The original game is like, he's a creepy, like predator cannibal cult leader. And so we know what we got to do here. And so the entire thing ends up like skewing very, very broad. But it's so much worse here. And
well, it's all broad, right? Like that is like the definition of like, I mean, like there's a lot of specificity. There's been some specificity that happens in the television show as it tries to fill in those details, but the game itself in general was like much more broad about moments like this. And it does make me wonder, it's a huge, you know, hypothetical. I don't know, but you can't help but wonder, is stuff like this still in the television show because Druckmann is involved? If this was it's an adaptation, and it's true there are plenty of times where original creators are involved in that process. It's not necessarily a ding against it to take it from one medium to another, but as much as Craig Mazin has been able to like, you know, massage some things and I think like make it a better work in some places, you cannot help but wonder a different world where it's like blank canvas to adapt this story and characters how you would see fit. Would something like that episode essentially just disappear as a result? Because I don't know how much it actually accomplishes. Or you could have accomplished similar things more effectively in the way you're talking about without a over-the-top villain that is impossible to take seriously.
I definitely found myself wondering about that very question, mostly about the Riley episode, where I was like, this is such a... Well, we nailed it in the game, so now we're not going to touch this framework.
This is precious.
And this concept.
This is how we did it there. So we've got to do it here,
but it's not a game. Like this is an episode of television that feels like a video game. And so there've been moments I've wondered that there's just been a little bit of hesitation to sort of reimagine how this could all come together. But I do think the real culprit here is like, this is a 9-episode order that should have been 13.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really expensive show, too. I'm sure that is, you know, this is a show that moves locations and you can see the money in the next location. I do wonder if maybe there's an opportunity because they've already said this, you know, they're not going to adapt the second game all in one go. You know, they've said at least 2 seasons. It's very easy to imagine how that would happen, given the way that story plays out. Although I imagine they'll reinvent the structure. I don't think they're going to copy the structure of that game. That would be extremely weird. It works as a game. I don't know if it works as a game, but I don't think it would work as television. And it's interesting you point to. So that ending sequence is really interesting because in the game, right, you're playing as Joel. The character has made a choice to go on a rampage in this hospital to save Ellie under the pretenses, well, she didn't get a choice. Well, so how can this can't go? You have to take her out of this. Like, if she's going to die in pursuit of this cure, she needs to make the choice to have done that. Well, I mean, Joel doesn't actually give a shit about that. That may be his own personal justification, but you as the player then have to murder all of these people and mow it down. Like, you are holding the controller, you are killing the fireflies, you have this sequence in which, like, time to be a badass while mowing down these people. And I don't know if I agree with Joel's his move here necessarily, even if I understand where the character might be coming from. And here it's almost like on the show they have to dial up him being like a psychopath.
Yeah.
Because it's the one time, I really liked how they handled the sequence in Kansas City where, like, they crash the car and there's only a handful of people for Joel to take out, and it's handled appropriately brutal, where it makes the violence feel impactful. Here, they essentially copy and paste the idea that, no, you're gonna kill 50 people, or you're gonna kill 30 people. Like, the kind of body count the show is avoided because it's goofy and, like, works in the context of a video game with mechanics where
it's so goofy they have to sort of hide it in a montage.
Right. And that's, again, one of those moments where it's like, is this because this is what we did in the game? Now, there are moments where they choose to go differently, right? Like the way Joel pops the surgeon, like, got me. I was like, oh, fuck. This way I forget how it's handled with, Marlene in the game, but there is a brutal efficiency to Joel's actions in which, when they make choices like that, I think it works in terms of portraying this character as, like, completely lost it, especially relative to the happy-go-lucky way he talks as they head towards the mountains, as they have to walk back to Jackson. But I don't know. I found that I don't know that I necessarily agreed with their solution to the issue there with the way it was presented necessarily.
Well, I think one of the ways this ends up really failing and ends up feeling like in a lot of ways a far lesser work than the game. Yeah. Is that at the end of the game, I always felt like if Joel had done the wrong thing, his actions were at least understandable and to an extent defensible. Like, now, as we learn more about Joel, I've sort of reconsidered this character. Like, my feelings have shifted on that a little bit, but, like, overall, I think at the end of the game, I always came away from the game feeling like Joel was somebody who was, like, perfectly constructed to handle this exact situation disastrously poorly. And also, like, the Fireflies had set this up to come across as, like, as brutal and tragic as possible. And all these things sort of happen, and the result is this, like, explosion of misdirected violence. But I think crucial to it as well is that the game was much more subtle. Ellie withdraws more in the game. My memory from the last act of the game is Ellie gets quieter and more introspective, and it is clear that she has a suspicion that there may not be a future for her. She has a suspicion that, like, she might be going to her death is kind of the implication, but it doesn't get enunciated as directly as it basically does in the show, where, if you're going to say, well, she didn't get a choice, here she all but tells Joel, my choice is to redeem all these sacrifices and losses, even if it means, like, sacrificing myself. She all but tells him that. And so therefore, when Joel has his whole like Hulk out over this, it's so clear now this is entirely about him. There's very little genuine concern for Ellie as an individual in all of this. This is entirely now about him taking back his possession, his daughter, his family, both from the Fireflies and the world. And so now he's just, like, straight monstrous. And maybe that's just a direction they wanted to go, but I do think it ends up in this place of, much like they did with Ellie in the second game, honestly, where it's like you push this thing so far, and now the like sense of tragedy of it all, the sense of like we have come to the worst possible outcome, given who this character was and their sort of tragic flaws and their virtues, all that sort of come together in this disaster. And here at the end of it now, I'm like, no, this person is just kind of like an irredeemable villain at the end. Well, yeah,
because we like the end of the previous episode, he utters baby girl, right? And like this is portrayed as an emotional breakthrough moment between these two characters that has a certain sweetness, even if she is covered in blood and had just murdered someone who was, intent on assaulting her. But then what happens over the course of this episode can't be construed as anything other than Joel looking at Ellie not as a surrogate daughter, but as a piece of property to like be under his thumb.
And a replacement daughter for the one the world owes him.
Right. And there's his whole question of consent in regards to a potential cure, vaccine, what have you, seems really undercut by the fact that he no longer looks at Ellie as a person as much as just like an inhabited spirit for a great wrong that was done
to him, which I don't think
many
is
years ago.
As explicit in the game. Like obviously that is some of what is churning beneath the surface.
That's what made the ending so great. Was like you could bring to it what you wanted to. There was enough room for you, and it's why the cut to black in the original when she says okay, which they maintain here, like was fantastic because you just don't. You're like. You don't get the resolution, and you can sit and ponder like
and
where these characters
lands,
arrived.
Like the fan video of the fan adaptation of The Last of Us, where it's like the beat's the same, but like it's none of it's landing as well. And so I think like it's been a frustrating come down, honestly, since Kansas City for me, because like fundamentally I was like, this is all kind of working, and I was like they've really done a damn good job adapting this. And then it was like, we're going to stomp on the gas and get through a whole lot of like plot events. And along the way, we're just going to discard the central, like the convincing and like earned evolution of this relationship. And now it's going to be reduced to like waypoints on a story. And that's that like it, like for me, it has been half the series was like, wow, they're really doing something great with this adaptation. They figured out like the right places to expand, the right places to pare back. They're, drawing up things about the world, etc. And then the second half is like, all right, well, we got to get through the rest of The Last of Us.
Yeah. And it's just frustrating because my guess is the second season, even though it'll be, they're going to break up the second game into multiple parts, there probably will be more episodes. That would be my suspicion, is like, why wouldn't you have a little bit more if the creators think they have the room for it? But they're about to adapt a bunch of material, even in the best of circumstances, that I'm less
that
interested.
Space Museum sequence is going to hit a whole lot different now, because his whole like desperate, like, you're my daughter, I'm so glad I met you, I'm so glad that you're in my life because I was so sad and broken otherwise. Anyway, let's go to the Space Museum. Daddy-daughter day, fantastic. I'll kill anyone who touches you. Like, it's like Joel has ended up in this place like, I don't want to see this guy take this kid around a fucking Space Museum. Like the Joel Ellie relationship's kind of blown here, where it's like,
and the way that Pedro Pascal plays that sequence after as they're driving back and specifically when they're walking through kind of like the mountainside on the way back to Jackson, like he's not just he feels like a sense of relief, and he's like joyous, like he's kind of bursting at the seams, like we get to go live our lives now, Ellie, like this is great. Like it is unnerving. It is very clearly, much in the way they're doing groundwork with. I understand the groundwork with Ellie's stuff to a certain extent, even though I can't like agree or disagree with it, because it's just like that's where the second part of the story goes. I see why they're making those choices. The thumb on the scale, with like emotional scale with Joel, in terms of how they're having Pedro Pascal play him. It strips some of the ambiguity, because he almost gets cartoonish. It's like, what are you doing, buddy? Like I don't. What's going on?
I mean. The way that Pedro Pascal is playing this character and the way that like the show frames him makes me almost wonder if they don't realize, not that they don't realize, but like at times it feels like the showrunners think that Joel reads the same in this show that he does in the games. And like that is what my girlfriend has been talking about this entire time as we've been watching it together, is like she really likes that first game and like feels like a real connection to that character, and like is seeing all of the worst qualities and like worst like moments of that game and of that character as like the baseline that they're doing here, and doesn't feel like the show believes that is a bad thing, that he is a worse version of himself here. This
is the part that like I've been wrestling with that too. Like, do they not see how much more of a monster they have made him? How much creepier they have made him by the end of this, where it's like, oh, like, Ellie, you're effectively held hostage now by this like nut. Like he's like, you know, to your point, Patrick, like that entire manic speech in the car and like, oh boy, we're just gonna get Tommy soon, and like, oh, I used to go hiking with my daughter, she was great, you're just like her. All this stuff, it's like, it's so skin crawling. Yeah. And the thing that made the original game work is that if you really reflected on Joel, this is the whole conversation, like when you Patrick, you and I talked with Galt, where it was like, was Joel kind of always this guy? You know, like all the good things we saw in him, like was all of it kind of tempered and shot through this lens of like real selfishness and real like controlling nature? And if you sort of scrutinize the character, you sort of draw those through lines of like, there's some real vices to this guy's like character makeup. But also, he had the makings of a genuinely convincing hero and sympathetic character, and the game exists in that tension, right? And it's why the story is so affecting to revisit, because you revisit that tension. And now it's the tension is drained out of it, and I'm staring at it, and I'm like, this is just straight up like the worst possible interpretation of Joel, like in terms of like he is the worst. If you just
version of himself at the end. But I do wonder if, and I broadly agree, but what I wonder is the difference is when The Last of Us ends, even if there were conversations about where could these characters go next, there was no next page to flip to, right? Like that was an invention that occurs later as they try to figure out what they want to do with these characters and the ramifications of the choices made at the end of the first game. Here, I almost... not pass is the wrong word, but it makes me interested to see, like, you know, you're doing the second season, you're writing it knowing that you're getting to this other place. What kind of person is Joel in that second season? Like, is it, if they drop this, right, if they drop like the creepiness, like that will seem a little bit strange, because it's like, well, if you're going to make this character choice, take it to its logical conclusion. When what is it like for Ellie to spend 5 years with him at Jackson? Like, do we find her in a different place? You know, a lot of that second game, you know, is her emotionally wrestling with the choices that Joel made on her behalf without her involvement. Is that just heightened as a result of this tension, and that actually over the course of 5 years at Jackson, she ends up resenting him in ways that will like make more sense as a result of the character we played? This way, that's the most generous possible interpretation of where they're going with it, where I could see a payoff, because otherwise, I much prefer the broader ambiguity to the end of that story. And so that's my best possible interpretation of like why these choices are being made, is like, hey, this will make more sense when we revisit these characters half a decade later, with all those tensions continuing to pile up.
Patrick, before we wrap up here, there was one other game we didn't get to last week that people actually were like, when are we going to hear about Card Jockey? So it's time to hear about Card Jockey.
I am bad at solitaire, it turns out. I've never played solitaire before. I'm not much of a card game person. Didn't really grow up with a family that played a lot of card games and stuff like that. And so Card Jockey is a game that came on the 3DS from Game Freak, the Pokemon developers. They do occasionally do projects that are not involving the Pokemon. One of them was this Card Jockey game, which is a mashup of a like horse racing sim and solitaire. So basically the way that works is and it was it's re-released there was a remake that just came out on Apple Arcade. So you have to sign up to get access to it, but it's a really good update to that game if you liked the original or looking to try it for the first time. Basically the way it works is you have, the way the race functions, how you are a better, like your horse going faster, going slower, how much stamina it consumes, is based on your ability to complete as much of or all of a round of solitaire, where, you know, essentially you are. Tell me if solitaire is more complicated than this, because I am unaware of the rules of broader solitaire. But at least in card jockey, mostly what you are doing is you are trying to get rid of all the cards that have been placed on a board. And like, let's say you pull a 9, like then you can, the next card you can take off the board, your main board, is either a 10 or an 8. And you're kind of working your way up the numerical
that's
system.
solitaire.
Okay, all right, nothing more. Okay, all right, I wasn't sure if there were like, I'm sure there are like every card game, there are a billion variations on it that can give you different rule sets, but that is essentially what is happening here. And to make it more stressful, it's like there's a timer, right? Like, so you have a meter going down at the bottom to try and force you to go through it faster. If you goof up, like if you do the math incorrectly or observe it incorrectly, you click a card that isn't actually one that you can pick up, then that like impacts the stamina of your horse. And so it's really just a bunch of rapid fire solitaire against this like pretty basic horse racing sim. Like the couple of decisions you make in between rounds of solitaire are like, where is the horse on the track? You know, if depending on if it's like tight against the turn, if it is like wider against the turn, that determines not only the difficulty of the hand, like, so you can choose, like, do I want an easy hand, a medium hand, or a hard hand, and that will, the harder hands you're playing, the bigger bonuses you can get, but also you're increasing your likelihood that you're not going to be able to clear the board. And if you don't clear the board, then you may not get the bonuses, you may not get the other things that come out of that. And yeah, I'm not good at, I keep cheating is what I'll say, and by cheating I mean so you can't pause the game while you're playing, and there's that countdown going, and I don't like that countdown. It stresses me out. It means I do much worse. And if you just like pull down the top of your display on an iPad or an iPhone, you like bring up like, you know, some of the UI stuff, and the game goes into a pause state because the application has gone into a pause state, and I may or may not be generously checking to see like, maybe I should see what my notifications are, just like by half an inch, so that I can study all of these cards that are in front of me. Because a lot of it's just like I'm not doing well with the pattern recognition, like fast enough for the game, for me to succeed in the game. You can get like different items that will like make that a little bit easier. Like for example, like what will happen is like when there's nothing to play on the board, you can go to like. You have a deck of cards that you then flip over, and like that determines the next card that you can play. Well, you know, just like in any card game, like it may not be the first one you flip over. Maybe it's 4 cards underneath that. And there's like an upgrade item that will like it'll flick you right towards the one that you can use next. So if like for some reason there's 5 cards that do not apply to what's in front of you, it'll just skip you right to that, so you can play that a little faster. The thing I'm struggling with is you have to plan ahead and like think about like how am I going to take advantage of like this 8, 9, 7, and I'm just not doing that over and over. I'm just not doing that. But it's so well made and so much fun, and like the like spectacle of it is so satisfying that even though I'm complete dog shit at it and do not appear to be materially making progress in terms of being better at it, it's such a delight to play that I just keep cheating and playing more of it.
Patrick, can I ask you a very important question?
Yeah.
How are these horse names?
What is the name of my horse? Oh, wow. I forgot. I should have set up while I'm looking this up so I can keep talking. I really should have importantly set up the premise of this game.
Yeah, so that's the first I was hearing of the horses. I pulled up a screenshot and it's like, this isn't solitaire.
You die in this game to start. You are a jockey who is riding a horse. You go behind a horse, the horse kicks you in the face, and you fucking die.
Well,
and
yeah,
you go to
happen.
heaven, and then like are told by someone in the pearly gates, like, you know, you can go back down if you achieve your dream. And like your character explains what their dream is, and it is not to become an excellent jockey, but they force you down there anyway, and like that, like you go back down to earth after a horse kicked you in the face, and you go to become the best dang card jockey that ever was. That's a good Blingin' Kid is the name of my horse.
Blingin' Kid.
Blingin' Kid. You get a couple of horse options to start Ooh, let me just get my daily login bonus.
Yeah,
Thank you very
please.
much.
Oh, thank God, Patrick.
I know. I haven't gotten to this point in the game, but like as you are progressing through, like it has kind of like a, you know, like in a roguelike, like sort of like you're going from one node on a map to the other. You're not choosing, like that is determined based on wins or loss. So like if you win a race, if you lose a race, or if you don't place a certain amount, that just kind of changes where you go on that map. But as you go along, like the horses get older, then like you can acquire different like breeds of horses, like the maturity of them changes like certain stat elements. There's like also kind of a broader meta layer that's happening in individual races where like, let's say you don't think you're going to do well in the race, but you're really close to like upgrading a skill. It's like there are icons on the map that you can collect or try to collect as your horse works its way around that, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to get first place here, but I can unlock a new skill that might help me another time. Like one of the skills that that my Blingin' Kid has is...
Thank you.
What is it? I forget what the actual skill is called, but basically, like broadly, it means like you get bonus points if you are like huddled up in the middle of a bunch of horses. And like there are different versions of that where like if you're ahead of like the horses you're racing, like if they're right behind you, you get a bonus. Another one is like if you're, you know, directly behind, you'll get a bonus. Mine is like you want to be kind of middle of the pack, and then you're getting like increased points that you can spend on like your broader like speed and acceleration, and like you're kind of managing a lot of those meters as you go through. But the problem I'm running into is like in order to really do well, you need to be clearing the board, and I'm just not clearing it consistently enough to like get those bonuses. So then I end up not doing particularly well at like the home stretches of races. But it's really excellently made. I'm going to keep banging my head to get it. I'm going to become a solitaire expert one way or another, however much cheating I might need to accomplish that task. But it's really well made. Card Jockey is... I've heard for years that it was extremely good. I never played it on the 3DS, but if you have an Apple device and you know want to sign up for Apple Arcade, it is well worth checking out.
That looks really, really cool, and the horses look very cute.
They are very
all right,
cute.
So it looks like we did not get to this one while I was out, but it's more stories about people being evil in Computer Lab.
Nice.
This involves a Patrick. Does this ring a bell, Patrick? Or
let me look.
I think you had marked it for an episode, but I don't think it.
No, we didn't do this one. We did a different one.
The recent hi there Waypoint crew, first time, long time. The recent story about flipping the Windows XP monitors in a high school computer lab reminded me both of my own unexciting story about the same thing as well as a much better story from college. I was an engineering student taking one of the necessary math classes for freshmen, which included a once-a-week computer lab to use the math software Maple to hopefully help us learn abstract topics more easily. The room was maybe 24 or so iMacs, each with their own machine name and password written very clearly underneath the screen. I had that class with a few friends and sat behind one whose name happened to be Patrick. One day I had a realization. These are Macs, and under the hood, Macs run a modern version of Unix. That meant I had access to the command line and its subsequent fuckery. I fired up the terminal and remote connected to Patrick's Mac. I couldn't do a huge amount, and you don't have access to the mouse after all, but what I could do was make empty files directly on the desktop. So as Patrick worked on whatever the day's project was, little files would appear on his desktop, visible on the corner of the screen with names like, "Hello, Patrick," and "I've become self-aware, Patrick." Each time I made one, he'd look around the room, but of course I was just studiously typing away. I don't recall him ever saying anything about it, and definitely never told him about it. We fell out of touch in the way that people do, but I still sometimes wonder if he ever tells the story about the time his math lab iMac gained sentience. Thanks for all you do. Fuck capitalism, fuck fascism, and trans rights forever. Alyssa, Washington, D.C.
Shout out, Alyssa.
I just want to know what's going through other Patrick's mind. Like, do you feel like you did something wrong? Like, why wouldn't you tell anyone what's going on? That's
To protect
tremendous.
the computer. That's sapient, Patrick.
Well,
It's an act of kindness to your
I guess
friend,
that's true.
the iMac.
That's extremely good. I like that a lot.
It's really good.
We have a good question here from Waz. Dear Waypoint, you wake up and look at the clock and see it's 5:16 a.m. You need to wake up by 7 a.m. Do you get up now or try to get back to sleep? Regards, Waz. Crunch time.
I get up.
I go to sleep.
Get up. So I love early mornings. They're hard to get up for, but I do love early mornings. So if I have been cursed to not get a full night's sleep and a good night's sleep, I will take the gift that is offered of like a 5 a.m. wake up and just get that little jump start on the day. Now, one of my absolute favorite things to do on those types of days is there's a nice donut place. It's not in my neighborhood. It's like a 15-minute drive away, but the streets are empty at that time of morning. They open at 4:30. And so if I have just ended up awake before 6, frequently I'll be like, well, fuck it. I'm just going to hop in the car and go get some breakfast donuts and have just a festive, like, chill little morning. And so that's kind of a ritual I've got for those mornings where, like, there's that touch of insomnia. But just in general, it's like, if I'm like half asleep, if I'm like one eye open, I can see the clock, but I know I can just fall right back asleep. Okay, I'll probably stay in bed.
Well, so that was going to be one of my follow-ups. Was like, what is the? Are you going to spend 45 minutes going back to sleep
right.
to then? You know what I mean? Like that's like, and those you can tell sometimes when you wake up. Like, how do I feel? Like, can I just
the Sandman
drift
has
right
departed.
back to sleep? Yes, like that'll happen with me if like, my kids get disrupted at some like early part of the morning. It's like, can I solve this problem without waking myself up that much and then go back to sleep? And sometimes you can, and then other times you can't. That's it. I am blessed that like I can't nap particularly well, but I can go back to sleep pretty effectively. So most times, if I could get an extra hour, like I can get that extra hour and we'll seize it. But I certainly am sympathetic if you're the kind of person, like this is my wife, like when she is disturbed up, she is disturbed up. There is no just slinking back to sleep. And so that's why it always drives me up a wall that my dog can, in her old age, I spend most of my time sneaking into the room, desperately hoping she won't bark at me. I will like hide under, I will like solid snake my way down to the floor to sneak around the bed to get into my side, go up with a blanket or a pillow and throw it on the dog in the hopes that I can then slink my way into the bed without being observed. Because if I am observed, and then she will wake up.
In my head, it sounds like kind of smothering your dog, but
no,
you're just blocking its line of sight? All right.
Line of sight. She's only got one eye. The other eye is whoosh, into the gray zone. Can't really see anything out of that one.
Like a Skyrim bucket. Mm-hmm. You're Skyrim bucketing your dog.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm just trying to protect. I'm just doing what's best for my can't sleep well wife, and I got a dog that makes that an adventure every time I go to bed. I am a tremendously easy person to wake up when I take my medication for the sleep disorder that I have. Otherwise, all bets are off. Truly, anything could happen. Generally though, like if I'm with another person, right? If I'm sleeping in the same bed as someone, I am very easy to wake up. In terms of just like once I open my eyes, I'm like, I'm good to go. I can start my day. And that is to me a gift, because I like to be the person who's like, oh, let me go feed the cat. I think that's cute.
Yeah, like stealing a march on the day is always nice, and there's a lot of nice things you can do. All right, this last one we'll close out here. Josh in New Orleans, you didn't have to tell us this, but you did, so we're gonna read it. This is about someone winning a video game competition. Patrick, does this ring a bell, or this feels like a story that would have tickled you?
Is this the one of winning a PlayStation controller?
Yes.
Yeah, we did that one.
Oh, man, shit. All right, then that's...
Yeah, it was truly brutal.
That's the end of that. I couldn't believe... I was staring at this like, you're just telling the world that you did this, Josh? And then you sent pictures of, like, the adorable little tykes that you were just, like, stomping on. The detail about the kid being like, my PlayStation controller's broken, so I hope I get a new one. And he just
he's just a rich fuck. Like, screw this kid.
It's incredible. So, yeah, I just want to register my approval and delight in that email. Look, you got to teach the kids. Like this it's a hard world out there, and sometimes you got to be prepared to play this man's game. Even if it was a competition for children, apparently.
Look. Then you should have had an age cap. Could have been solved.
Yeah, that's true.
They chose not to.
That's on the organizers there for sure. It's like you can't be a grown-ass person coming in here to do these children. But there you go. All right, that is a wrap on today's episode of Waypoint Radio. If you want more from Waypoint, you can follow us on Twitter at Waypoint, Facebook and YouTube, Waypoint Vice. You can follow me on Twitter at Rob Zachney. Patrick, where can people follow you?
At Patrick Klubbock.
Ren.
At Ren or Raven.
You can also go check out what we publish on waypoint.vice.com. This week you can check out Patrick's post-mortem on the most shocking death in God of War Ragnarok. And thanks to Waypoint Plus, we've been able to have a bunch of fun streams lately. Kato played a ton of the new raid in Destiny. Every time I tuned in, they were falling to their death in what appeared to be the same place, but I'm sure things improved from there. And last week, Patrick and I had our final Dead Space stream and then decided our final Dead Space stream would happen later because we were having so much fun. We're just going to beat this game at some point. Speaking of that same ethos, this week, Natalie and I are going to return to Citadel Station in preparation for the release of the new System Shock remake. And
do we think that's still coming out this month, though? I know they keep saying that, but we're running out of time. And I haven't heard about.
There's a lack of specific date information on that store page, and there's been an ominous silence. So
they just said March, and so we had talked about like, all right, okay, Rob, you and Natalie need to revisit this. We'll tie it to the remake's release date.
We're swiftly running out of March.
They are swiftly running out of March, and usually at this point, I've at least heard like, hey, like review code requests are open. No, nothing. So
nothing.
We'll see.
But yeah, so we're going to return to Citadel, and then Patrick has threatened me with a Roblox time. So that's going to happen as well. Our Waypoint Plus listeners already got to hear us discuss The Lighthouse, but this week that episode of My Turn will drop on our public feed. And this week, Patrick and I will be recording an episode of Sports, hopefully featuring a special guest. I am also going to tell everyone about the Bulls fever that is sweeping the nation.
Oh my God.
Play-in tournament bound, and who knows where they'll go from there. Yeah. But we'll discuss some other stuff in the world of sports as well. If that sounds good, or if you just want more Waypoint, you can go to waypointplus.com and subscribe. Not only do you get access to our premium feed, but you're also helping support Waypoint and everything else we do here. And if you want to show not just support, but zeal, go to waypointgeneralstore.com and buy some of our fine Waypoint merch. Our theme music is by Bowen. The track is Miss You off the EP Pale Machine. Learn more at waypoint.zone/BOEN. This episode was produced by Michael Hermes as Kato is on break. For now, we're calling time on this Tuesday. We'll talk to you again on Friday. Till then, fuck capitalism. Go home.